we've still got quite a few people coming into the room. So for anyone who's just joined, welcome. It's lovely to have you all here. And yes, let me just wait another 30 seconds or so while we continue to let people in. Thank you to everyone who's just joining. It's really wonderful to have people from all over the world. Maybe in the chat, if you've got access, you can just type in where you are joining us from. That would be lovely to know. I've already got a few messages saying hi, so that's wonderful. And now I think I'm more than happy to pass over on to Andrew, who will lead today's session. So Andrew, it's now up to you.
Right, thank you very much. And hello, everyone. I hope you are well. And I think that even that phrase has probably got a little bit more meaning given the focus of today's session. If you are, wherever you are in the world, good evening, good afternoon, good morning. I'm joining you from Gadigal land here in New South Wales, Australia, and it's evening time here. Educator Wellbeing. Let me give you a bit of background about me first, and so you know who you're sharing the space with, and then we'll dive into the topic. I've been in education for 35 years now, and worked in the UK, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia in various roles: middle leadership, senior leadership, and running a school in Southeast Asia and South China. And over the last 6 years, I've started an organisation and have partnered with Teacher Horizons a number of times. And the organisation is called 4Cs Coaching. And this is us. We work in about 40 different states, countries, and territories across the world at the moment, almost exclusively with schools, international schools, and education management organisations. So if you're part of a school group, we might be working for, for example, people in head office. Our work is primarily around coaching and leadership development. And one of the things that we've noticed working with lots of educators in lots of different parts of the world is that there's often common preoccupations. And one of those preoccupations is around middle leadership development, building capacity of middle leaders. Another one is about having highly effective teams, team dynamics, team cohesion, team effectiveness. A third one is around having difficult conversations, giving feedback and having someone's difficult conversations. But one certainly universal one is educator well-being. It's something that we see time and time again, given the complexities and pressures and stresses that there are in schools. And so we hope this is a relevant and helpful session today, given most of you, I think, are coming from international schools. So what we're going to do today is explore some of the influences on well-being. And in many ways, I'm perhaps not preaching, but certainly discussing with the converted here, because if anyone knows about influences on their own well-being, it's the people in front of me, because you'll be experiencing it. We're also going to explore some of the reasons why we react and respond differently to different types of settings that might create, it might generate implications for our well-being. Why is it some people have more of a type of response to certain settings than others? So we're going to look at that varied response, but spend much of the time looking at a range of different strategies that you may wish to consider that may be helpful in supporting your own well-being and the well-being of colleagues as well. So before we dive into some of the content, I just want to share this. This is a group of colleagues that I work with. This is from 2017-18, from a school that I was leading in South China. And I'd been experiencing coaching as a school principal director at the time, and I recognized there was something in the process of being coached that seemed to have a positive impact on my well-being. And so we instigated a program called Coaching for Wellbeing and trained 12 colleagues that were working closely with students. I mean, every colleague was working closely with students, but some had more of a direct, perhaps more pastoral focused role, and train them in coaching techniques. To the point where actually we had a second cohort of another sort of 20-odd colleagues trained in coaching approaches. And that work was collected in case studies through an organization called Collective Ed, which is part of the Carnegie School at Leeds Beckett University in the UK. And what we found was there seems to be a direct correlation between taking more of a coaching approach in conversations and enhanced levels of well-being. We found it in students, but we also found it during the COVID period, um, when a lot of our coaches were working with some of our teachers as well, supporting them make sense of the world as it was turning upside down and changing rapidly around everybody. So one of the, I guess, points here is that a coaching approach where you're doing a lot of listening, a lot of questioning, a lot of exploring, um, rather than giving advice, can actually support well-being in itself. So there's something about the nature of conversations that is relevant here, and we'll unpack that a little bit more in a moment. So I'm going to invite you. I'm going to ask you a question. If your first name begins between A and L, so Leonardo, you're right in front of me, so that's you. What challenges are you facing right now? Can I invite you, if your name is between A and L, what are your challenges right now? And I don't want you to write down the challenge in chat because there's some confidentiality there. But anybody that's here in the room, there's over 50 of you, if your name's between A and L, first name, just think about some really tough challenges you're facing right now. If your name begins between M and Z, I invite you to think about something that's brought you joy recently. Something that's brought you up. And I've Moss there, I think I can see, is that Moss, Linda Moss? I can just see a real smile start to emerge there as you were thinking about that. And as you think about either the challenges that you're facing, if you're between A and L, or the joys, something that's given you joy if you're between M and Z, maybe if you could just jot down a couple of words in chat that come to you that describe thoughts, emotions, energy. What words describe what's coming to you as you think about that either challenge that you've been facing recently or joy that you've been facing recently. And we'll just try and capture some of those in chat and start to skim through them if we could. Joan, are you happy to read out as they start to sort of drift in? So I see a little bit about self-confidence there. What else?
We have quite a few that have been mentioning the challenges that they face, a lot about navigating career,
Yeah,
frustration, maybe burnout as well. It seems to be quite a common one, overworking.
I see joy being outside in nature, um, challenges around perhaps, oh yeah, career pathways, roles and responsibilities being misunderstood. Actually, there's research that's just come out recently that says one of the main contributor to, to burnout in any organization is lack of clarity around role definition. I don't know, I'm not clear what my role is, what the expectations around my role. Little things, the sun shining, good food. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Sandra. Balance. Yeah, I have lots of conversations in my coaching work around balance. Um, oh yeah, working with young people and the joy that comes from that. Great. Okay, roles. Yeah, okay, clarity to find. Yeah, okay. So one of the things here, all I've done is simply ask you a question. What's one of your challenges, or what's something that brings you joy? And there's a quote from a researcher called David Cooper Ryder. He works in appreciative inquiry, and he says people live in the worlds our questions create. And in some ways, I've just tried to create a world for you. I've asked you a question, and I've taken you in a certain direction, either towards a challenge or towards something that brings you joy. And so the first message here is that um, what we focus on grows. What we focus on grows. And the nature of our conversations can influence our mood and therefore our sense of well-being. So what are you focusing on, and how is that influencing your well-being is a sort of more of a rhetorical question. And there's research around this that suggests that if we take a more of a solutions-focused approach to our conversations and what we're thinking about, more than a problem-focused approach, it can actually affect our mood and our well-being. And again, we'll unpack that a little bit more shortly. So message number one, what we focus on grows. and the nature of our conversations certainly affect our mood and our sense of well-being. So what are we talking about? What are we engaging about? And how is that impacting on our sense of well-being? So the second point here is about zones of well-being. Some of you may be familiar with the PERMA model. It was originally PERMA, and the H was added. It's the work of Martin Seligman, who wrote a book called Flourish. He does an awful lot of other work in this area as well. And basically what he's done is the research suggests that there are different areas of our world that if we focus on and focus building certain habits, certain strategies in those spaces, that can really help our well-being. So rather than take a sort of a generic approach, which is that I just want to be happy, not that that's a bad thing. If we get a little bit more granular, we can start to hone in on particular areas of our world where we can do certain things that really enhance our well-being. So we'll come to some of these a little bit later. So, for example, practicing gratitude on a regular basis, actually just tuning into things that are in our world that we're grateful for. So someone said that, just sunshine. To focus on strengths, to focus on things that we're good at. There's a phenomenon called negativity bias. Again, some of you may be familiar with this. It's this preoccupation that human beings seem to have with when we've had a negative experience, it tends to stay with us longer and holds, it sticks longer and is a deeper kind of rooted memory normally when we had a negative experience. And what this is suggesting is that we then tend to focus on weaknesses, things that we're not good at, as a starting point for development and improvement. But actually, the prevailing research says start with strengths, focus on what we're good at first. And ironically, when I work with educators, they often sort of say there's a reflection that we often do that with the children that we work with. We spend more time sort of building children up with what they've done well and then make some suggestions about improvement. But as human beings, and certainly a lot of educators, tend to focus on what we're not good at. So what we focus on grows. So focus on the strengths as a platform. Mentoring and coaching. There is some research that suggests one of the best ways to help our own well-being is to help others, support others. And it's why in the coaching profession, and there's been in the last 5 years, there's been an explosion of people working in coaching across lots of sectors, and certainly in education. Those that coach have notably very high levels of well-being. And there's a suggestion that one of the parallels, or one of the reasons why, is that we spend our days supporting others in building agency, insight, goal setting, moving forward in whatever challenges that they're facing, and that actually supports our own well-being as coaches. So offer to mentor someone or support someone in some way can actually have a direct effect on our own sense of well-being as well. Educators are naturally very good at that. They go into education because they want to help others anyway. So it's a natural starting point. Purpose, I'll come back to in a minute. I'll be clear on your work, but goal setting is another area that seems to support well-being. But it's not just any old goal. There's certain things about the type of goal that we set that seems to really impact on our well-being. And again, I'll come back to sort of what the research says, so that, again, maybe if you're going to set some goals around any area of your world, you might set the right type of goal that really impacts on your well-being as well. So the second message here is that we can enhance our well-being by focusing on particular zones of well-being, by being more granular and more sort of intentional in nature when we're looking at enhancing our well-being. So some influences. I'm going to look at three this evening, this afternoon, this morning, depending where you are. So we're going to look at motivation. We're going to look at something called saboteurs, a saboteur profile, profiling, which comes from an organization called Positive Intelligence in the US, in California. The invitation to this workshop offered a link. And some of you may have had a chance to have a look at that and maybe have done the saboteur profiling yourselves. I'm also going to look at EQ, emotional intelligence, as well, briefly, before we dive into some of the strategies. So what I'm sharing here is something from a mapping tool called motivational mapping. And it's a self-perception inventory. So it's an online questionnaire that you complete some questions and it gives you a map, a profile of your key drivers, your key motivators. And it's a framework that is built around three blocks of motivators: achievement-based motivators, relationship-based motivators, and growth-based motivators. And within those, there's three types of motivators in each. And when you complete the motivation audit, the motivational map, you get a profile and it's like a bar graph. So I'm going to give you just an example here. Yesterday, I was coaching someone on her profile. She's an educator here in Australia. She's a senior leader. And a searcher, an expert, came up in her profile. So search is the bottom left. So for her, meaning, purpose, fulfillment, doing things that are worthwhile are key drivers for her. But expert was a close second, so in the middle there at the bottom. So knowledge, understanding, specializing, professional learning. She, by her own admission, was an avid reader of education research. So one of the things that we looked at there was how can you enhance your motivation in this area? And what she came to was, yes, she wants to do some learning around, it's actually students with special educational needs. That was a real passion for her because of a family connection with it. So the research was going to serve her search a motivator because she felt there was real purpose in it. It wasn't just learning for learning's sake. It was learning to enhance something that was important to her. So a profile might look something like this. And again, what it allows us to do is think about what's important to me, how much attention do I give to that? Am I in the right role? Am I spending enough time thinking about my role and how it's linked to what motivates me? So again, recently I was working with a senior leader in a school in Southeast Asia. Was that he had a massive to-do list, and it felt like a massive to-do list. But what he to his so we talked a little bit about focusing in on not just what you do, but why you're doing it and how it contributes to what's important to you. So what we focus on growth. So what are we focusing on in terms of our motivations? Now you don't have to do a motivational to think about this, but what it points to is maybe just spending some time reflecting on what really drives me. Can I think of a time when I was really motivated by something? What was it about that thing that motivated me? And how can I tap back into that more frequently and tie it into what I'm doing now? So the third message today is we can enhance our well-being by focusing on our primary motivators, what's important to us, our drivers, particularly intrinsic drivers, and develop some specific strategies around those. So this is the saboteur profile from Positive Intelligence. And they're pesky little gremlins are the saboteurs. They're basically our strengths amplified to the point where they become grotesque, dysfunctional caricatures of our strengths. So just to give you an example, stickler in the middle there on the left, sticklers are perfectionists. They love things to be just right, perfect in every way. And that can be really, really helpful, in terms of people who are very good at planning and very methodical and very organized. It's a great strength to have. But at times when we get the curveball, the unexpected, something changes rapidly, sticklers find it very difficult to deal with that because it doesn't stick, the plan doesn't now fit, and they can get quite anxious about things. And pleaser is another classic. I work with a lot of educators, and people pleaser in the middle, and that sort of sense of I go out of my way to support others, even to my own detriment. And again, so that's the real strength there is that pleasers have a lot of empathy. They're really good at, particularly with emotional empathy and cognitive empathy. But sometimes they get in their own way, and they go go out of the way to the point where they actually create more stress and pressure for themselves by taking on too much in support of others. So I'm going to invite you to think about your own reactions at times of change, uncertainty, transition. And I'm also going to ask you to think about what you've observed others doing or responding at times of uncertainty, change, transition. How do people tend to respond? And do they respond in any of the following ways? So as we go through them, I'm going to share 10 different ways based on this saboteur profiling tool. I'm simply going to ask you to sort of count up as we go, do any of these and see whether you get 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, or so on. And we'll ask you to put the number in chat, or if I can see you on video, it'd be great. Just wave your hands and see how many show up for you. The idea is to sort of, I guess, hopefully affirm and validate that these saboteurs are natural responses that we sometimes experience in ourselves or we observe in others and can affect our well-being. So 1 point for each of these. So I'm going to start off with the judge. Okay, the judge tends to see things in binary terms: win, lose, right, wrong, good, bad. And at times of change, the judge will often see it as bad, negative, a risk. Again, anyone you know that's like that, is that how you tend to respond to change? The avoider tends to kick the can down the road. They say, I don't know, I'm not sure about this. I'd rather go and do something that I like, and I'll avoid dealing with the difficulty right now. They won't eat the live frog in the morning, first thing in the morning for breakfast. They'll kick the can down the road and they'll worry about it later and hope it goes away. Controller, they get anxious when things feel like they're out of control, and they'll step in and want to take charge. And it's not that they want to be the boss. It's that they feel if I can take charge of things, it'll feel more certain and I'll feel less anxiety and worry. Again, is that you or similar? Have you seen that? And I've observed that in other people. Hyperachiever, these are people who set the bar very high. They're very goal oriented and they tend to like a challenge, so they get drawn towards change, and they see it as a challenge and they want to win, or they'll look at it and go, I don't like that. I don't think I can do as well as I'd like to do, and they resign themselves to the fact that they won't engage. Again, is that you, or have you noticed that in others? Hyper-rationals, they love evidence. They love to assess and analyze. They'll want lots of, okay, I saw a couple of nods there. So that's sort of like evidence-based decision making. And usually it's about, let's not make the decision till we've done it, asked a few more people, consulted a bit more, done a bit more research. They want as much evidence as possible. So they'll procrastinate, but really what they're trying to do is minimize the risk by knowing as much as they can and analyzing as much as they can. Hypervigilant see the risk in everything. They're the people that say, yeah, but what if that happens? Or we haven't thought of that yet. So that's a risk-oriented kind of mindset. And again, we often see that. Pleaser, they're concerned that the change that's being led will upset certain people. They won't respond well to it. So they tend to focus on the human reaction to change. And again, is that something that you see in yourself, or is that something that you've observed in others? Restless, these are the people that have 24 tabs open on their browser at any given time, and they skip from one job to another. I call it lily padding. They skip from one thing to another. They're always ahead of the game in the conversation. They'll interrupt because they've already finished your sentence and want to move on. But they can feel overwhelmed when there's a change going on because there's so many places you could start and there's so many things to do. It's where do we get started? So that's how the restless tend to respond. Sticklers, it's got to be perfect. If it's not perfect, they'll get frustrated. They sometimes will withdraw because they can't get it just right. So again, is that something that you've observed in others or in yourself? I'm a recovering stickler, so I find change quite difficult, and I've had to moderate and get used to the fact that the world is dynamic, it's complex, and sometimes things just don't go quite as planned. And get over yourself, really. victim is the final one, and victims tend to have this kind of woe is me kind of mindset. It's like, oh, more change. It's always, why do I have to deal with it? And it's going to be tough. And it's all they sort of they tend to see things quite tough, and they're a bit they can sort of suck energy out of a space. Those with the victim mindset, but some people have it. It's part of our makeup. But we all have some of these in varying extents, to varying extents. So I'm just curious, could you either put in chat a number? Like how many of these did you recognize in yourself or others? If you're on the screen and video and you just want to put your hands up, I'm going to put up 10 because I've worked with enough, I've worked with over 250 educator school leaders, and I know I've seen all of these in saboteur profiles. So I've seen them all. Um, what about you, yourself and others? How many of these resonate? Do you recognize? Either like hands up or just a number in chat would be great, just so I can get a sense of that you're seeing this. 4, 5, 6, 7. uh, great. 7, 5, or 2. Oh, that's okay, great. That's a low one. Uh, there's quite a few here. 3s, 5s, 4s, 7s, 6s. There's quite a few. Okay. Being all of them at various stages. Thank you, Moss. Great, love that. Okay, all right, bye, Gary. So look, the point here really is that um, we all have saboteur traits because we all have strengths, and these are our strengths magnified to the point where they become grotesque. Now, if we can shift them back to the strengths, they're going to serve us well. If we stay in saboteur, the continuum that is strengths to saboteurs, we're at the saboteur end of the continuum, and we know when we are because we'll feel it pulling our strings, and we'll feel usually negative emotion, negative framing and mindset. We'll feel binary. This is good or bad. We'll win or lose. It's right or wrong. We'll tend to have that kind of thinking. We know that it's not going to serve us. And so the message here is that we all have saboteurs. Um, if we can catch them, if we recognize them, and this is a free tool, by the way, so it's great because you can do your own profile and it gives you a whole lot of information about it. You can go, oh, okay, like how can I catch that when it's showing up? How can it enhances your emotional intelligence, self-awareness. It's a great framework for self-awareness, but we can all get in our own way. So catching them through self-awareness enables us to manage them better. And when we can manage ourselves, when we can regulate ourselves better, the chances are we're going to have a better level of well-being because we can catch ourselves at that sort of stitch in time kind of thinking. It's one of the things that I do with those I coach. Universally, everyone says it's one of the best things that they find that we do together. It really helps them all the way through our coaching. And then finally, the work of Daniel Goleman. Some of you might have come across him. He's not the only person that leads the work in emotional intelligence, but he's certainly one of them as a global leader. And he talks about this ability to recognize and understand our moods, our emotions, our drives, as well as the effects on ourselves and others. And you'll notice there, it says our emotions and drives. So our drives is the motivational maps, and our emotions is partly to do with saboteurs, and that's one of the reasons why I've referenced them. So they're really helpful, those two, in just building up a sort of, I guess, a framework for self-awareness. And what he says is when we're good at that, when we recognize some of the things that do shift our mood, it can be, for example, tiredness when we haven't had a good night's sleep. Is that something? Or I have two teenage sons here, and one of them gets hangry. When he's hungry, he gets grumpy. It's really grumpy, and we kind of recognize that in him. He doesn't recognize it in himself, but we recognize that in him. So, what are the little catalysts for you? And then how do you start to manage that? How do you manage you so that you can be a version of you that you'd rather show up more regularly? It's better for you and better for others. And we're going to look at some of the strategies shortly. So that's kind of a bit more like micro, looking at selves. Now, there's also the macro space, which is like, what can organizations do? What can schools do? And there's some things here just to consider. I just want to sort of throw into space before we look at some particular strategies. Um, if you are on LinkedIn, I would recommend, if you haven't connected with or looked at the work of Dr. Helen Kelly. She is certainly leading a lot of work in this area on well-being in international school settings, and she's recently launched the 2026 survey, educator survey on well-being for leaders and for educators in international school settings. If you contact me, I'll share my contact details at the end. I can send to you the link. I recently reposted it on LinkedIn, and she's gathered hundreds, if not thousands, of responses to explore what it is that's happening in international school settings around well-being. And you'll see there that workload is one of the areas that she cites as a significant contributor to educator well-being. And you'll notice I've highlighted there role clarity because some recent research that came out, it's shared on LinkedIn about a week ago or so, says that one of the most significant, in fact, the most significant precursor to burnout is role clarity. I don't, I'm not sure exactly what's required of me. And that means I can't channel my effort and my skill set into working towards what is expected. And that's a prelude often to burnout. It's not the only thing, but it's certainly the most significant thing based on this meta-analysis that was done. She also recognizes workplace culture, a sense of belonging, connection, and so on is really quite important. But also work recovery. And this is our space, is like the individual space. What can I do that helps me? And so she says, for example, psychological detachment. And I'm going to share something called self-distancing shortly as a strategy and suggest how you could go about that, which supports that psychological detachment. How do I switch off? How do I step back from work if that's a source of reduction in my well-being, if it's impacting negatively on my well-being? The other thing is control over time, or the sense of control, the perception of control. And this takes us then to this work on something called locus of control. If you've come across, done any work in psychology and attribution theory, the locus of control by Rotter in 1966, so we're talking it's 60 years old. The locus of control refers to the sort of sense of belief that individuals have that they have some control over their lives. And this can be really significant in well-being. And what the research suggests is that when we have an internal locus of control, that means when we focus on things that we know, control the controllables. So our level of effort, what we give time to, our skill sets, our strengths, when we focus on those things that we know we have more control over, it tends to be associated with better health outcomes, sense of self-esteem, taking control, taking charge of our world. When we feel the world is being done to us and we have no agency in it, that can be very sort of unsettling, and it tends to then negatively impact on our sense of well-being. So psychologically speaking, the research here on an internal locus of control suggests focus on what we can control first. That will more likely lead to an enhanced level of well-being. And what it says is focus on what you give time to, effort on, and focus on strengths and skills, things that you recognize that you're good at. And if humility gets in the way, because often it does, I often ask people in my coaching, what are you good at? And people sort of hesitate. Oh, I don't know. I say, what does someone that knows you really well, what would they say? And straight away, well, sometimes people tell me this and that, and it all of a sudden it starts to flow. So if you feel that if humility gets in the way, so what do people tell me I'm good at? What would the best friend that I have say to me if I said, what do you like about me? What's good about me? And then that's a great place to start. And again, there's some research I'll share around strengths, focusing on strengths and why that's important in a moment. So locus of control is part of that. So another message here is that, yes, schools have some responsibility and influence in our well-being. They certainly do. And there's an opportunity for leaders in school settings to help shape the agenda with everybody in the school community. And yet we actually have more control over how we frame our relationship with our workplace. We can take charge. And that's really important. It's not saying it's all about you, but it can be significantly about you. That's the good news. The good news and the bad news is it's in your hands as much as anyone else's. Um, okay, so responses and remedies. Why is it that some people seem to experience the same work setting and have such varying responses to the work setting? And part of it is, well, we're wired differently. We have different saboteurs, we have different motivators and motivation profiles. We have different mindsets. Of course, that's going to be the case. But our brain tends to lead us, particularly the limbic system. So that's the emotional part of the brain. Emotions drive behavior and perspective. And so if we can work on that in some ways, then that might be a good place to start. And so I've already acknowledged this negativity bias that we have towards focusing on when things go wrong, they tend to stick with us longer. And that's part of the brain's sort of way of managing risk, future risk, by saying, don't go near that again, because that's not good for us. But what that means is that a lot of our conversations tend to be focused on problems because that's where our brains tend to sit. And about 80% of our cognitive processing is recurrent, which means it goes like a roulette wheel. It goes round and round and round, and we revisit issues again and again and again. So if what we focus on grows, then the question becomes, what do we want to focus on? Do we want to grow that negativity bias? Do we want to focus on problems? And if we do, we know where that's leading us. Or do we want to focus on something else that's better for us and better for others? So some strategies. I've mentioned enhanced emotional intelligence already, so we won't go there again. But I'm just going to share sort of 6 or 7. I'll go through them fairly quickly and see if any of them kind of take your sort of get your attention and whether you think that they might be something to consider. So I'll zip through that. Conversations. Last week, I was in a room with 80 school leaders from 12 schools around a particular network in northwest Sydney. And I asked the leaders, what percentage of your time is given to conversations? And it varied between about 65% up to 95%. But basically, it was a lot of time given to interaction and conversation. And I suspect if I asked you, we won't have time for everyone, with 60 of you here, but I suspect a lot of your day is given to interacting in one way, shape, or another. And then I asked those school leaders, what percentage of your conversations are focused on problems and problem solving? And it was at least 65, 70% again. So a lot of time given to a lot of time on focusing on problems, focusing on what's not wanted and what's not working. So there is a problem with problems. And here it is. It's not that we're problem phobic, by the way. It's not that we ignore problems, but there is an issue with problems. And this is it. When we engage in problem focused conversations, we tend to do a couple of things. We tend to focus on mitigating risks, so minimizing risk, and addressing weakness. When we do that, we fuel our saboteurs. We engage negativity bias, and we also tend to initiate a stress response, which reduces our ability to think more clearly. Our prefrontal cortex gets inhibited by levels of stress. So we're trying to work out how to solve a problem, and by doing so, our brain works less well when we're trying to problem solve. It doesn't mean we can't solve problems. It means it's just not as working as clearly. When we shift to what's called solutions-focused methodology, we focus on what's wanted. And this is not the opposite of what's not wanted. Okay, so we focus on what's wanted rather than what's not wanted. It's not the opposite of what's not wanted. When we solution build, we focus on strengths. We focus on what's working as a starting point to move forward. So we engage our resourceful brain. And it's about possibilities. It's about opportunities. It's about a generative space. And if you've ever been involved in a creative process where you're brainstorming, your brain works differently. It feels different. The energy is different. And that's because it's using a different part of the brain. And so we're more likely our cognition is going to be sharper, better by doing that. So I often reference the shopping list. Um, if you go to a supermarket, you go with a shopping list. Do you go with a list of things you don't want? Or do you go with a list of things that you do want? And I think we probably know the answer to that. So this is the same parallel. It's the conversations are focused on what we do want. So when I coach and when I was in school leadership, people would come to me with problems and I'd listen, I'd hear the problem out, say, well, that sounds pretty tough. Look, what's really wanted here? Or ideally, what would you like things to look like if they were working well? And it just shifts. So people live in the worlds our questions create. I asked a question that shifts the conversation towards solution building. And we can do that in ourselves. Self-talk is just a conversation. So one of the strategies is to consider is reframing conversations away from problems towards solution building. And it definitely has a positive impact on well-being. Seen it time and time again. A solutions-focused approach. So just to be clear what that actually is, this is the work of Dr. Mark McCurgo, who's based in the UK. He says solution-focused thinking is two things. It's either focusing on what's wanted, he calls it the future perfect, or thinking of a time when the problem wasn't there and working out what was happening or happening less so we can try and replicate it in some way. Okay? So that's what solutions-focused thinking is. It's not problem solving, it's about solution building. It's a different kind of mindset. This TED Talk, I'd really, if you've got 14 minutes to spare ever in your world, I'd recommend listening to this. It's by Kelly McGonigal. It's called How to Make Stress Your Friend. And she spent years, about 15 years, working with people trying to reduce their level of stress. Because in her world, and in fact many worlds, the prevailing wisdom is reducing stress is a good thing. I think many people would actually put a nod to that and say that that makes a lot of sense. What they found in longitudinal studies is if you have a high level of stress and you see it as negative, it will negatively impact your life expectancy because you have negative health, physiological repercussions of that. If you have relatively high levels of stress, but you frame them as potentially serving you and positive, it extends your life. It extends your life. And they're trying to look at why is that? And what she talks about in this TED Talk is what people were doing was saying, when I'm under stress and my body is getting me ready for fight or flight, it's like building me up, ready to perform. My veins dilate so blood can get around my body more readily, oxygenated blood. So my brain is ready to go and my muscles are ready to go. My heart rate goes up. So it's doing exactly that. Oxytocin gets pumped into my brain, which is sometimes referred to as the cuddle drug. It's a chemical that makes us want to reach out and connect. So we reach out for help. So connection and conversation are something that we naturally seek under stress. Now, I'm not suggesting go out and seek stress out. Okay, I'm certainly not suggesting that. But what I'm saying is under stress, reframing stress as how could this be serving me right now in the short term can actually help your brain rewire the stress reflex and the physiological implications of that as well. Again, she explains it way better than I can right now, but it's definitely worth a look. It's a really fascinating talk, and it's completely changed the work that she does in her work with the clients that she works with. Goal setting. I mentioned having a good goal, but I did say at the beginning the type of goal is quite important. So this is the work from Tony Grant. a UK sort of national, but based, sadly no longer with us, but was based at University of Sydney. And he did some work around goal setting that's most effective. And what he says is that Having short-term goals and long-term goals, so proximal and distal goals, is actually quite a good thing. So having a maybe a longer-term aspiration, but a short-term, here's what it looks like in the short term, is actually quite a good thing. This is really quite important. They said concordant. Having a goal that resonates with your values, your motivations, that feels like you really want to give time and energy to, is more likely to be a successful goal for you. Um, and he said, have approach goals, not avoidance goals. So an avoidance goal is, I'm going to stop smoking and drinking because I know it's bad for me. That's an avoidance goal. I'm going to stop doing something that is negative. He says, don't have those. He says, have approach goals, which is, I'm going to lead a healthier lifestyle by doing the following things. That's approach goals. So have approach goals rather than avoidance goals. Again, they're more likely to gain traction and longevity. But this one was quite important, a performance and mastery goal. A lot of goals in education tend to be outcome oriented. They're performance goals. I will do better at. I will see the results in this way. And what he said was that mastery goals are also important. And they're the ones that say, I will make progress in, I will get better at, I will learn through do. Whether I achieve the performance or not, I will get better at, I will learn through doing this. My skills will improve, my understanding will improve. And so setting goals that are both performance based and mastery based is actually quite important. Um, there's a book called The Progress Principle by Teresa Amabile at Harvard University. And she says one of the most motivating things you can do is focus on progress. And when I say that to a group of 60 odd educators, that shouldn't sound a surprise. With young people, how often do we focus on progress as a prelude to moving forward, as a prelude towards goal achievement? So really encourage that idea of focusing on progress and having short-term and longer-term goals, but having approach goals. Strengths. I mentioned strengths are a great place to start. So just to say why it's important, Marcus Buckingham, an organization called Gallup, who do all the polling, they're a polling-based organization, but they also have a profiling tool, a strengths tool called Clifton Strengths. Some of you might have done it yourself and been profiled in your strengths. Their research says that if you want to see an improvement in performance, you get up to a 36% improvement in performance by focusing on starting on strengths first. Now, the better we do, the better we feel. So there's a direct correlation between often performance and well-being. Not always, but there often is. So that's why strengths make sense. Peter Seligman, who did the PERMA model and also works at an organization called VIA Character Strengths. Again, if you haven't come across them, it's free. They've got a free profiling tool. You can go on there, fill in the form or the questionnaire, and it will give you a results back, which will list your generic strengths. Excuse me. What their work shows is that when you focus on strengths, you feel better about your life. You have better relationships. You feel better about the quality of life, personal growth. It has an impact on your well-being. So strengths is always a great place to start for any type of improvement, whether it's about performance or just that sense of well-being. Self-distancing. So Dr. Helen Kelly talked about sort of psychological detachment. Self-distancing is similar. It's a psychological way of stepping back from something, particularly if you feel it's impacting negatively on your well-being. So there's three ways to frame it. One is time framing. So an example, you're in a situation that you feel is causing you some kind of stress, negative emotions, you feel it's negatively impacting on your well-being. One of the questions you can ask yourself is, how is this going to seem in 3 months' time? And what you're doing, you're decoupling your current space where your brain is going into this overdrive sort of limbic system mode, and sometimes referred to as an amygdala hijack. And you're stepping back and saying, if I separate from now to later on, do I think this will seem different? I use it in my coaching quite often when I'm working with people who are exhibiting high levels of stress. And time again, you'll see a natural shift in their perspective and their relationship with what's happening right now. So the simple question is, yeah, how will this seem in 3 months' time? Or will it seem different in 6 months' time? And just shifting your time framing can really have an immediate impact on how you see the current situation and therefore your sense of well-being. Distance framing is slightly different. So what I sometimes, this is an example of how I might use this. Someone's again, in a school setting, they're under a high level of stress, it's affecting their well-being. I might say, tell me where your happy place is. And sometimes it's like, it's a beach with their family, or it's up in the mountains hiking, or it's somewhere out in nature. I say, like, okay, just put yourself there for a few minutes. Tell me about what it's like. What are you experiencing? And there's a physiological response. Often you'll see it. The body shifts, it starts to relax, the breathing changes a little bit. Say, okay, now tell me about your relationship with this thing that you've just been talking about. And invariably there is a shift again, because what they've done is they've self-distanced. They found a way to move themselves from where they are to another place. A very simple self-regulation strategy as part of emotional intelligence. Um, Persona framing is, for example, you come across a situation where you feel really stuck. You're not able to move forward. You haven't got the strengths, the strategies, and that can impact your well-being because you feel just like you can't move forward. And the question here is, who do you know that's good at something that that would move this forward, and what would they do? So you don't even have to go and ask them. You just have to put yourself in their shoes. It's called, I sometimes refer to it as the whose shoes strategy. So if you can shift that, put yourself in someone else's shoes, how would they do that? What would they do? How would they go about it? And I've used that again a lot in my coaching. People often say, "Oh, well, they'll probably go and do this, that, or the other." I say, "Okay, can you do any of those things?" Oh, well, I thought maybe that one. And all of a sudden, you've shifted yourself from feeling stuck to that sense of internal locus of control. I've now got some control here and can move forward. So self-distancing again is another strategy to help enhance well-being, just simply by self-talk and reframing through one of those three distancing techniques. Practicing gratitude, again, that's part of the PERMA model that we saw earlier. And you can see there that just building a habit, often a daily habit, maybe diarizing it in some way, jotting down something that you're grateful for can really shift your mindset. I won't read all that because you'll have the slides anyway, but just to acknowledge that it's a really, really valuable technique, is just and a habit, practicing gratitude. And there's always something in our world that we can be grateful for. Finally, just acknowledging from here what Dr. Kelly talks about, what schools can do, and there's questions there. I just want to highlight two of them. How well does my team collaborate? I do a lot of work around what's called systemic team coaching. So I work with teams. And I find that often at the center of people's levels of well-being is how connected they feel with the teams they work with. Very rarely do people work in schools when they're not part of a team. And it can be the source of their stress and well-being challenges, but also it can be the source of positive well-being because they have positive relationships and connection. And that bit at the bottom, how well do I feel supported, but also do I support others? Just acknowledging that in support of others, we support ourselves. It can really enhance our well-being too, just simply by giving time and energy to others and in support of them can support ourselves as well. This is because I'm aware of time. Again, just a quick slide to acknowledge there's some underpinning theories here that have underpinned all of what I've just shared with you. Hope theory. If you're an avid reader and you like research, I recommend having a look at hope theory, Snyder and Lopez, the PERMA model, which I shared at the beginning. Reframing, we've talked about at the bottom there. Self-determination theory by DC and Ryan. We talked a little bit about that, and this idea of taking control. And self-determination is quite important. To have a sense of choice in things can really help our well-being too. And then that emotional intelligence piece that we start to talk about a little bit again, and particularly with positive intelligence. So we've covered some of these through what we've shared. Um, Finally, that is me. You're welcome to connect at any time. I'm on LinkedIn. I post fairly regularly thoughts on working with international educators around well-being, leadership, teams, connect, and welcome to email me anytime if a question has arisen about some of the work I've shared today. But thank you for your engagement. Thank you for all the things in chat, which I haven't been able to read because I've been too busy focusing on this. But I think we've got a few minutes for any questions. I'm happy to stay around for a little bit longer if you've got time and a burning question. Love to take any questions and hopefully uh, provide some answers that really serve you specifically. So thank you ever so much for your time. And I wish you all well in whatever setting you are in. Thank you very, very much,
Thank you so
Fiona.
much, Andrew. That's been a really amazing, really insightful session, and I'm sure a lot of people will agree. For anybody that needs to leave, that is absolutely fine. All that I ask is that I'm just sending a very quick link in the chat box, and it will take you to a Google form that will take you about 2 minutes to complete. And it's just for you to give any feedback so that we know what kind of webinars you would like to see in the future and something that you enjoyed about this one. So if you could fill that in, that would be really helpful for us at Teach Horizons. I have had a lot of people asking, and I just wanted to confirm that within the next week or so, we will send out a follow-up email that will have the webinar recording and also any resources that Andrew has shared. So just again, a big thank you to everyone who's joined us today. Like Andrew said, if you do have any questions, you're more than welcome to stay for a couple of minutes and ask them now. And of course, we would like to say on behalf of Teach Horizons, a huge thank you to Andrew for this session. It has been absolutely amazing. So thank you so much. And we've seemed to have a lot of positive feedback while you were speaking as well. A lot of people were giving
That's
very
great.
positive comments. So that's always good to see. So
Thank you.
thank you very much.
Much appreciated.
So thank